Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Writer's Block, brought to you by True Faith. My name is Di. I'm going to be your host today. I'm joined by Tim, Yousef, and James. How are you going, lads?
Good,
very well.
Good.
Good to see you all. I would just like to point out before we start that Yousef has done nothing treasonous. Tim has not barged into me. James is definitely not a coward, and I am not a mole. Just in case you were wondering. Good to see you, lads. And we've got a good show for everyone today. We're going to be talking about best British managers around at the moment. We're going to be talking about the transfer market after COVID. We're going to be discussing if small clubs can still compete, and our own personal favourite NUFC season, which I feel like is going to be the shortest conversation of the lot. If we start to talk about best British managers, it's quite an interesting one at the moment, obviously, when you consider our current incumbent. James, I'll start with you. Can you give us a British manager who is being successful, and what do you think is kind of a successful British style these days?
I think this idea of the traditional British style is thankfully becoming outdated now, and we're starting to see some really fantastic managers coming through in recent years. I think of the 10 British managers in the Premier League at the moment, the three that stand out for me personally are probably David Moyes, Graham Potter, and in my personal opinion, the best of the bunch would be Brendan Rodgers. This is a guy
I thought you were going to say Steve Bruce for a second.
No, definitely not. But no, look, Brendan Rodgers, this is a guy who took Swansea to the Premier League, first time of asking, turned them into an established top-level side. Very nearly won the league with Liverpool, came within a whisker that season, went on to Celtic, won 6 league titles in a row, put them on course for the treble, which, of course, they didn't end up achieving. But then went on to Leicester, and he's always left the club in a much healthier position than what it was when he joined. But if you look at his style of management and his way of playing, he does like to play out from the back. He utilises a high press. He keeps the ball well. Players know their positions under him. But most importantly, his players respond to him, and they're almost in awe of him sometimes, and that's rare in a British manager. You get it with the likes of Pep and Klopp, but to get it with Rodgers speaks volumes about how highly regarded he is at Leicester. But look at what he's done with the likes of James Maddison, Harvey Barnes, James Justin, just to name a few. He's improved every single one of those players. And I still don't think he gets the credit he deserves either, to be honest. I think he largely goes under the radar when people talk about the elite managers. But for me, Brendan right now is the best British manager at the moment.
I think when you look at it from the perspective that he kind of failed, in inverted commas, at Liverpool, getting so close to the title and not winning it, I think that kind of taints everyone's perspective of him a little bit. What about you, Tim? Have you got any additions there?
Well, I wanted to try and pull one out of the bag that nobody's ever heard of. So I did a bit of scouting around to see who was pulling up trees sort of further down the leagues or even in Scotland. And I failed to do so. So what was interesting, though, when doing it, is it brings out there seems to be a bit of a transition going on at the moment. And I think James is right. We're starting, thankfully, to see the back of some of the classic old school football managers. So you look down in the Championship, and you've got the likes of McCarthy, Warnock, Pearson, all playing the trade down at that level. Arguably, Allardyce will be taking West Brom down there. Bruce most likely taking us down there as well.
Yeah.
So it's starting to see the back of those. And interestingly, you've got the likes of Rooney, who's obviously at Derby now. You've got Woodgate, who, although he's only in temporary charge at name escapes me, Bournemouth. And then you've got like Gary Rowett, and I tell you who I do like is Gareth Ainsworth, who he's doing great things down at Wickham with a very limited budget. It's obviously they're not doing great this season, but on a very, very limited budget to be scrapping away in the Championships. Fair play to him. But the one that does stand out for me though is Steve Cooper at Swansea, and he's had a very interesting route into management because he was a youth team coach. The majority of his career has been at Liverpool and then with England. So I'm wondering whether that might be an interesting route for a lot of managers to take.
Yeah, I think he's someone who he plays football the right way. He's obviously a very good coach. He's developed a lot of players that are playing in the Premier League and obviously won the the World Cup. Was it under 19s, under 17s for England?
That's right, yeah.
So he's obviously done a fantastic job. I feel like everyone's stolen our answers now, Yousef. But what do you think, mate?
It's an interesting one because I think this thing about British managers and the traditional sort of old school. You go back to when British clubs were doing so well in Europe in like the 70s and 80s, that those managers, the likes of Clough, and then even going into the likes of Alex Ferguson and Bobby Robson and even Keegan, these weren't managers who played the percentages and played this sort of hit and hope, Allardyce, miserable football. So it's interesting, that sort of British style. I'm not sure that's necessarily always been what the British style has been. Possibly the uniting theme through the British style, I guess, has been speed and pace of which the game is played. And I mean, I agree with Rodgers. You can see it's not that sort of percentages game, but it's played at pace down the channels. And the other one that I think is interesting is Dean Smith at Villa. Because again, his side, a lot of running. They press high up the park, and they're not a possession-based side. They're certainly not a long ball side. They're actually very, well, they look fantastic against us, and they have a lot of possession as well. But generally speaking, they're not a side that likes to hold onto the ball. They're a side that likes to get forward quickly, retrieve the ball quickly. And I think that's the new British style, possibly. It's very similar to what Rodgers is doing. And honourable mention to Roy Hodgson as well. Not fashionable, maybe, and a bit long in the tooth, but he's been doing it at a good high level now in the UK and abroad for getting on for 30 years. And to be honest, I think we'd kill to be where Palace are in the league right now. So shout out to him.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think Hodgson's an interesting one, and Moyes, I think you mentioned earlier, James, as well. I think they don't get the credit they deserve for the kind of adaptability they've shown, and I don't think the jobs will always work out perfectly everywhere you go, especially, when Moyes, for example, has gone from Preston into the Premier League with Everton up to one of the biggest clubs in the world. He was in Sociedad. He's now obviously doing a fantastic job at West Ham, and I think to be able to do those things in those variety of clubs and be successful, he's had to be adaptable. He's not had a style per se, and I think you could say the same for Hodgson. I think travelled all over the world, international manager, obviously managed at big clubs like Inter Milan, and did not a headline grabbing job there, but they were in a state of flux when he took over. Got them to a UEFA Cup final, so did a great job. There's just two more names I'd like to mention. Obviously, Steven Gerrard is obviously doing a fantastic job for Rangers at the moment. Won the league. From a selfish perspective, I would like to mention Ryan Giggs a little bit as well, because I think he's done a fantastic job for Wales. He's overseen what I would say is a kind of transitionary era after a lot of the older guard kind of retired or are slowing down after Euro 2016. And he's got us, he's only the second manager to kind of properly qualify for a tournament for Wales. And I mean, we are a small country, so that's no mean feat. So, but I think it's interesting, the kind of style question that we look at there, because do we think that there's, there's kind of an adaptation going on to try and be more like your Klopps or your Peps or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's becoming obvious now that the new breed of coaches moving away from that traditional British style that you mentioned. I mean, the game has changed massively in the last 5 years, never mind the last 20. So, look, the managers are having to evolve with the times. But look, as we rightly say, that the old guard, they are still around. The likes of Bruce, your Allardyces, your Pulises, they continue to get jobs, irrespective of how badly they have done with their previous club. And it just baffles me. I mean, how Steve Bruce is still in management at the top level, I'll genuinely never know. I mean, he's managed, 10 different teams? Crazy. But look, on a more positive note, there are managers out there, the likes of, Graham Potter, Dean Smith, Scott Parker, Gerrard, Eddie Howe, who do play positive, attractive football, and they are getting results and rightly get a lot of praise from pundits and fans alike.
You mentioned Eddie Howe there. I apologise, this wasn't any of the notes that I've given you. So this has just kind of come to me. Do you think it's interesting that he's not been given a job? And is that partly, do you think, because if you're going to look for someone who's a firefighter, let's look at West Brom, who tried to play good football, you're not going to look at someone who's going to play that style of football, or do you think there's kind of a distrust in there in the way that he kind of spent money with Bournemouth, did take them down in the end? Is there kind of an element of that to that, or do you just think it's the firefighting thing and that British style in inverted commas is what kind of people want? I don't know if Yousef or Tim want to take that.
I mean, I think anything would be an improvement on Bruce, but I do. It's a personal perception. I think how is people quite like him. Bournemouth are not. They're an inoffensive club. He's fresh-faced, young, polite. I don't think really that he's everything that a lot of British managers are not. But I don't necessarily think that makes him the answer. He's just sufficiently different from what we have that people might see him as one. But as you rightly say, Di, he did bring Bournemouth down, which I think is conveniently forgotten. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, true. Have you got anything you want to add there, Tim?
Yeah, and he did spend a few quid. You know, for a small club, he did spend some money on some players. And
Lerma.
Really pull up any. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He didn't really pull up.
Yeah, Jordan Ive wasn't cheap, was he?
No. So somebody will take a punt on him. I mean, I hope it works out for him because he always comes across really well. And he tries to play football the right way, so to speak. But it's interesting. We talk about style. I do agree. I think in 5 years, even the game's moved on. And if you look at the likes of Andy Carroll and Peter Crouch, if you look at the last three managers that signed those guys, last two managers that signed Andy Carroll, Allardyce took him to West Ham, and then Bruce took him to Newcastle. Obviously, it was on a free. And then Peter Crouch's Redknapp took him from Liverpool, and then it was then to Tottenham. Then Redknapp to Pulis signed him, and then Sean Dyche. So I don't know.
What a list of names.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Dyche is another one who I do a little bit actually thinks gets overlooked to an extent because it's not exciting to watch, but he's established a very average, in the nicest possible way, club in the Premier League. He kind of does an effective job with them every year, and if you listen to him talk, people think he's just a 4-4-2 kind of lumper, but there is definitely much more nuance to it than that, which I think he doesn't get any credit for.
I'd have him over Steve Bruce any day of the week. He's found a system that works, and I think, I'll caveat that by saying I'd rather have Pep Guardiola. But what I'm saying is he'd be the perfect manager under this current ownership.
Yeah, I think so. Just someone who's kind of effective in what they do in that sense. Yeah. We mentioned a little bit there about the transfer money that Eddie Howe has spent. A perfect, seamless transition into our next section. The transfer market after COVID is going to be an interesting one, I think, because it's going to be so vastly different from what the footballing landscape is kind of traditionally used to looking like. Does anyone see much business kind of coming this summer? I'll start with you, Yousef.
I suppose I'd look at the question a different way, and in terms of, who are the players that are out there that are going to, really attract that kind of big money, who the next generation of international superstars that you're going to be paying that sort of Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar type money for? It seems to me, I'm so preoccupied with looking at the likes of Kraft and Shelby and Hendrick that this is a million light years away from us. But, I just query, are there enough superstars in the pipeline that are going to generate those massive moves? Even Neymar now is 29. It feels like we may be entering a period. There are some exciting young prospects like Haaland and the likes of him, but I don't see that many players out there that are going to be enormous sort of headline grabbing moves that everybody's sniffing around. So even putting the sort of the post-COVID effect to one side, I just query whether the players are actually there to generate that kind of interest.
Yeah, like James, I don't know if you want to jump in there. You mentioned Haaland there, Yousef. Does it need something like that, do you think, to kind of spark the transfer window into life?
Look, yeah, possibly, but we're only talking about the elite clubs here. I mean, you've got to struggle to think how the mid-table or the smaller clubs are going to come up with the funds to be able to compete in a very tough market post-COVID. But the only two teams that I don't think will be affected by the pandemic are Man City and PSG. But look, they're state-owned. They operate in a different league. Look, they've virtually got an unlimited access to funds. Money's no object to them, and that's why generally they're considered the only two teams in world football right now who could afford Messi. But look, how the pandemic is going to affect other teams, it's yet to be seen. I mean, we're surely going to see a significant drop in player values, especially in the short term. I mean, it'll be a long time before we see the likes of Man U spending, 80 million on a Harry Maguire or Liverpool spending 75 million on a Van Dijk. So, whether or not financial fair play has to change again to reflect the pandemic, the current circumstances, I don't know, but it's a very grey area at the moment.
Tim, do you think something like the Euros might spark it into life a bit? Some kind of smaller, lesser-known players that people haven't seen, and people have a gamble on players. I know it's not not quite the same as it has been in the past, because we'll probably know a lot of those players. But do you think that might be something that kind of sparks things to life?
Do you know what? I kind of disagree a little bit with James. I think there will be some big money spent this coming summer. But conversely, I think people will see what Sheffield United did and spend 50 million quid in the last transfer window, as in last summer, and it not pay off for them. I mean, I think the likes of Haaland, Sancho has been talked about these last two transfer windows, but I think it's going to be the likes of City or potentially Juve. I think they might try and get rid of Ronaldo at the end of the season to free up some cash. I think there'll be a few teams will look to freshen up, but I don't think it'll be, I think it'll be some big signings rather than a lot of sort of medium signings, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But because of the sizes of some of these, particularly the Premier League squads, I think the loan market is going to be key for a lot of the mid-table or newly promoted sides come next season.
Yeah, I think the loan market is definitely going to be a big part of it. Just to go back to the Euros, I think that there's a definite window for certain teams like ourselves who will probably be forced to have a punt on a couple of players. And I think the drop off in what players are worth, in inverted commas, is massive. You look at the fact that obviously we signed Dubravka for relative pittance. I know Kraft couldn't trap a bag of cement, but we signed him for on the cheap. Cher was signed on the cheap. Again, relatively speaking, I do wonder if the Euros might end up giving some players who play for smaller teams a window, and people having a 5 million gamble, let's say, on someone like that. I can see that happening, and I think in turn that might kind of spark off some moves, because even if Jadon Sancho goes to Man United, let's say, there may be clubs around the middle of the league looking at people like Daniel James, and Juan Mata is still there, and Lingard. So I do think that might have a kind of a bit of a knock-on effect, but I don't know what impact that will have on Newcastle United. I suppose the loan market. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I think where that'll fall down though is that the salaries that some of these guys will be on, if they're still in contracts, there's no way they're gonna want to drop down. I mean, that's probably why Richie didn't end up leaving Newcastle in the last window, because I can't see Bournemouth paying anywhere near what he'd be on at Newcastle.
No, I totally agree, and I think that leads into the next thing. Really, is like you say, the loans is going to be a big part of that. And I think as a consequence from that, I think that will give a lot of younger British players a chance to break through, either, like we said, at loan or kind of their own team. You look at Leicester, you mentioned earlier, James Justin has been given a choice. They've not spent to replace Ben Chilwell. They've given him a chance. So I think there's that kind of opportunity is going to be there for a couple of people. I don't know if you agree, Yousef.
Yeah, that's actually one thing that, I mean, I've not really enjoyed watching Newcastle very much this season, but one thing I have enjoyed is actually seeing some of the young players coming through at other clubs. I mean, Smith Rowe in particular at Arsenal, I think he's looked really, really good. What's going to be very interesting to see, and you mentioned the Leicester lads as well before, James, Justin and the likes of that, and Harvey Barnes, of course, is coming through there quite nicely, keeping our beloved Iose out the side. But what will be interesting perhaps to see is, when the crowds come back, whether those youngsters will make the step up to, playing under those large stadiums and handle that pressure. There's been a feeling with some games, you watch them sometimes and it feels like a training match, and, players trying different things, and it feels like there's less of a sense of peril. You're not going to have, 30 or 40,000 fans getting on your back for, a pass being misplaced. It's going to be interesting to see, what the impact is when things start up again. But some of the players that have come through, I think Southampton as well, when they were on their really good run earlier in the season, the Armstrong and a couple of the others, I think they've looked like really good players, and I'd like to see some of that talent carry on when the when the lockdowns are over and we're back in the grounds. But some probably won't be able to handle that pressure.
James?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The loan market, I think, is going to go through the roof this summer. Look, there's no way we'll be spending another 40 million on another Joe Linton again for a long time. Well, that's probably a good thing. But if you look at the business, if you look at the business we did in January, it was one player we got in, and that was Joe Willock on loan. And again, I can see maybe 1, 2, 3 if we're very lucky coming in this summer, but they'll all be on loan. But certainly, if we're going to go down, which I still think we will, nothing's changed for me in the last few weeks. You've got to look at the academy prospects, and with us, the likes of Elliot Anderson, who were mentioned on the last show I did, Elias Sorensen, perhaps Callum Watts. They could be called upon for us in the Championship.
Do you think, just to go back to that, James, that because of the kind of contract situation that a lot of Newcastle players are in, that we kind of have to spend in the summer, even if we kind of financially maybe not can't afford to, but would certainly struggle to, because obviously we talked last time we were on together about seven players, I think it is, that are out of contract. Willock returning on loan potentially would be 8. I mean, that's a massive chunk of our squad. There's an angle there we'd kind of have to invest again, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to think we would spend if we did somehow manage to stay. But look, the reality is I just can't see Mike Ashley putting any more money into a club he doesn't care about. And depending on what happens with the takeover, we still wait and hope. But look, I think we've still got to be faced with certain relegation at this point, and a huge rebuild job, especially with the squad. I certainly don't think with what we've got right now is good enough to get us straight out the Championship next season, considering there's no way the likes of Wilson, Maxim and Almiron would stay if we were to go down. But yeah, for me, the only thing that can save this club is a takeover, because look, the prospect of another 10 years under Ashley and another 3 or 4 seasons with Bruce, I think we'll be in free fall, and I worry greatly for this club if that does happen.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with you there. Do you think that, Tim, if we did go down, that we would have to, as a consequence of Mike Ashley not spending, then have to play those youngsters that James mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago when we were last on, and I was a bit disparaging, saying, we've not really seen them play, but I genuinely think, I don't see what the alternatives are. It's a quarter of the squad pretty much that we're going to lose on frees, unless something drastic happens and they re-sign, which is unlikely. So I think we'll have to use them. I mean, I think the Longstaffs would be fine. I think Kel Watt's been out in League One, so and he's had a decent time from all reports, so he might be able to step in. But much like this season, you worry about scoring goals. Andy Carroll's got no legs. We'll lose at least one of the strikers. Wilson's probably our, outside of Sam Maximin, our probably most sellable asset. And if we haven't got relegation clauses built into these contracts, we've got to find the money to pay for the contract somewhere.
Yeah, it's a worrying prospect, isn't it, Yousef?
It is, and I don't want to sort of put a downer on the youngsters we've got, but you mentioned Elias Sorensen. I mean, he's 21, and so is Kel Watts. That's not that young anymore. I mean, I'd like to think that if they were going to make the grade, that we'd have seen a bit more of them by now, particularly in a side that's struggling. I mean, they've been around the youth and under 21, under 23 setup for years now, and they've not made the grade. I would love to see that change, but I just think putting that amount of faith in youngsters who still haven't made the step up is probably a bridge too far. And I'm with you, James. I mean, this team needs to be broken up. There's a massive rebuilding operation on. There are some, I think you'd probably keep the likes of, I think you'd keep Hayden. And I think he is the kind of player you could build a promotion side around. I mean, he was involved in the last promotion side.
Yeah.
You'd probably keep the likes of Lascelles. I'm not necessarily sure another Premiership side would come in for him. And you might keep Darlow but lose Dubravka. But other than 3 or 4 players whom you'd keep as your spine, you've got to invest in the remainder. And you know, if you've got a rebuilding operation, I don't think you can rebuild a whole squad around loan signings. You've got to have a certain amount of a certain core sort of set of personnel and a mission, and you know you have a few loan signings around the edge to top it up. But I'm just not sure that there's any alternative to investing, and that's true whether we go down or we stay up.
I do think it's interesting what you're saying about some of those younger players there, because you know I know we're not allowed to talk about Rafa, but in our cup games he did give some of those players a chance. And they were out on loan, and you know they came back. I remember that Blackburn game. I think it was a replay that we played. There was a few of those lads were given a chance in that game, and the current manager, bless him, doesn't seem to be willing to take a gamble on any of those players. I mean, he's even put Matty Longstaff, back in the under-23s this week. So I do think a lot of that is. I think Rafa, to an extent, was willing to give those players a bit of a chance in our first team.
Yeah,
and Steve Bruce.
Callum Roberts, I remember, was that Blackburn game. I think he started and he scored. He
scored, yeah. And I think that's the thing. There's some of these players. They may not go on to be kind of Premier League players or whatever, but there was a window they were given that chance. And I don't think that Bruce, you know, has been willing to take that chance. We've been very kind of first team centric, with the exception possibly of Anderson, who looks like he was coming through. But again, you know, he was on the bench a couple of times. He's not been seen since. So it is an interesting one in that aspect, because I think we'd be kind of plunged into a situation where we'd have to play these players. Because I agree with you, we do need a rebuild, but I think financially speaking, it's not really going to happen. Again, another kind of seamless link. Sorry, you look like you were going to say something there, Tim.
I was just going to say, is this the best season to get relegated? With what we've been talking about in terms of the transfer market shrinking, could this be the season where actually going down with a parachute payment is a complete blessing, and you have got more of a chance of coming straight back up? Don't want to find out, mind, but
absolutely.
I don't think we have much choice there, mate. Unfortunately, I think that one is going to be taken out of our hands. Yeah, I've talked enough there, so I don't know if you or James want to add to what Tim said there about whether it been a good time, so to speak, to go down.
Wow, that's not something, to be honest with you, I had particularly thought about. In any other circumstances, under a different owner, I would probably say yes. But the fact of the matter is, with Ashley still there, there is no hope for anything right now, and it sounds so bleak and grim to say this, but I've never felt this worst probably ever in the 26 years I've ever supported this club, in terms of just being at a low ebb. So, you know, and could a takeover happen? I'm so positive sometimes, and then other times I'm not. You just don't know really with what's happening at the moment and what's going on behind closed doors. But that aside, to think that we could go straight back up again for the third time under Mike Ashley, honestly, I can't see it. I really can't see it. I mean, I don't know what you think, Yousef, but it would be a huge ask to do it 3 times.
Yeah, there's this sort of always this small part of you that feels, can't we just, you know, break it all and start again? But I think that's a temptation we shouldn't really give into. Pretty much the only thing we have is our Premier League status, and I'm with you, James. I think when we came up last time, it was under Benitez, and we came up the time before. When you look at that squad that came up in 2010 under Houghton, who again is Bruce isn't fit to lace Houghton's boots. He had the likes of Joey Barton, Andy Carroll, Kevin Nolan.
Yeah,
that was a much better side at that time than anything we've got now. So. I don't think Lightning's going to strike for a third time if we go.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I kind of worry we might do what, you know, Mackems, Leeds, Chef Weds have done, and just kind of wander about those divisions a little bit. Unfortunately, there, Tim, that did ruin my seamless financial link into our next topic. As good as a question as it was, So thank you for that. We've also wanted to discuss whether we think small teams can still compete, small clubs, sorry, can still compete. You look at obviously the money we've talked about being spent in the top ends of kind of European football, and Man City and PSG kind of being state run effectively. It obviously dilutes your opportunity to be successful. Do we think that, or can you think of kind of any good examples where finance hasn't been the driving factor in someone's success? Tim, I'll start with you.
Rather than it be financial, so I mean, there's no way a club can. I genuinely don't think a club can really compete against these state-run clubs or these big, multinational football clubs like Manchester United, Liverpool, who've been that way for, since the onset of the Premier League. Really, they've just dominated. I don't think they can. However, just outside of competing for winning stuff, it's about having someone who's a visionary, who is looking after the club. So obviously we've got Mike Ashley. He's certainly not a visionary. But you go back to, the 25, 30 years ago, Sir John Hall, absolutely a visionary. He had this idea that Newcastle could compete, and he did everything he could in his power in, bringing in Keegan, making changes to the stadium, investing in players. Granted, we were spending big back in those days, but that it is possible. So you look at someone like Leicester City. Yes, they're relatively rich in comparison to a number of other clubs, but they had a vision, and they're still working with that vision. You look at the new training complex that they've moved into recently or about to move into. I mean, it's streets ahead of where we are, and that's kind of, for me, it's more than just about chucking a load of cash at it. It's about having a vision. It's something that we've lacked for a long time.
James, you're nodding in agreement there.
Yeah, I mean, Tim's right. I mean, it's becoming increasingly harder now to compete at the very top level without an owner who isn't a multi-billionaire. I mean, look, I think most people would be in agreement that wealth and financial resources are probably the two most important attributors to success in today's game. But if you look at the 90s, which Tim mentioned before, there were several teams in and around the top four, us included. You had the likes of Villa, Leeds, Blackburn challenging every season. I mean, Blackburn, even won it in '95, and I think the turning point for me was Abramovich buying Chelsea in 2003, and probably coinciding at that point with the English league becoming the most competitive league in world football and the downfall of the Italian league. But I mean, look, after that you had the likes of the Glazers buying Man U, the Abu Dhabi group, Man City, the Fenway group, Liverpool. They all kind of came in after that, and then the competitiveness of the league changed, and it just became the same four clubs every season fighting it out pretty much. And apart from that freak title win for Leicester, which you mentioned, that the top four has consistently been made up of the usual suspects pretty much. And you can't see that changing anytime soon. I mean, I just can't see how a team like Brighton, Burnley or Palace could mount any kind of realistic challenge to get into the top four. I mean, it would just be unheard of. But look, I think you've certainly got to give Leicester huge credit for what they achieved 5 years ago. And that title win did give a lot of fans hope. But the fact of the matter is, something like that only happens once in a lifetime. And I certainly can't see it happening again in mine.
Yousef?
Yeah, I can't disagree. I actually earlier was just looking at the 20 Premier League clubs, and the only one that doesn't have a billionaire owner, as in if you add up the personal wealth of all the shareholders, is Sheffield United, and they're going down. So, I'm not necessarily saying that's not cause and effect. They're not going down because their owner's not a billionaire. They're going down because they're crap. But, 19 out of the 20, and next year it'll be probably 20 out of the 20 are owned by billionaires, which pretty much proves the point. The one thing I would say, though, is there is a big difference between a club, and I think that goes back to what you were saying, Tim. There's a big difference between a club that just has a lot of money and wealthy owners and a club that invests wisely for the long term and has a vision. And if you look at both Arsenal and Tottenham, done in different ways, but the kind of success can be measured in lots of different ways. Tottenham that stadium is the best place I've watched football. It's a phenomenal stadium, that new Tottenham one. They play fantastic football. They compete at the right end. They don't win, but they compete at the right end of the Premier League every year. They were in a Champions League final a couple of years ago. Now, that, to my mind, that is success. Now, they've managed to do it while turning a profit. They've managed to do it without breaking their wage structure. They've managed to do it without, going into vast amounts of debt. So I think you can prosper without just throwing money at stuff. And actually, the success probably means more if it's allied to a vision. But you certainly need to have an enormous amount of wealth to even compete.
I think it's an interesting one. There's two things for me. Like I totally agree, and I think there's a difference between success in what Manchester United or Manchester City perceive as success and what we perceive as success. I think for Newcastle fans, and probably for fans of lots of clubs, just kind of being invited to the party a little bit is half the battle for us. I mean, if I were to watch, perish the thought, Newcastle play entertaining football and win every now and again, I'd be absolutely over the moon. I don't expect us to win the league. I don't expect us to get top four. I just expect us to kind of entertain now, because everyone I'm sure recognizes that the way football is these days, something special has to happen for you to win, like Leicester, or you have to be, rich beyond compare if you're going to go and, do what Manchester City have done, for example. So there's that aspect of it where I think just being part of the gang is as much fun as the winning to an extent. The other thing is I've read a fantastic book called The Club, and I don't know if you guys might have read it as well, about how the finances of the Premier League were developed over the years and how things changed. And the Premier League and the owners made no secret of the fact they basically wanted to follow the NFL model, where everything around the game, during the game, everything that happens is about getting people to spend money. Like half time was extended in football matches so that people could go and buy an extra beer. Everything around it, the pre-match, getting people to the stadiums beforehand, everything is built around money. And I think if you look at that being the case and people starting to act on that from the mid-90s to get round to the point we are now, it is solely financially based. And the NFL has the draft system, which does even things out a bit. You can pick up fantastic players for nothing if you're in the right place at the right time. But football doesn't have that system, and it'd be impossible to implement. So as a consequence, you are left with this kind of very elitist, financially elitist kind of playing field, which is anything but even. We wanted to finish on a positive of the favourite Newcastle United season, something we've kind of mentioned in our WhatsApp group. Obviously, it is slim pickings for the relatively younger members of the group. But Tim, no correlation to the younger members of the group comment. I wondered if you wanted to start on what your favourite NUFC season is.
Yeah, well, I am probably the most senior member of this group of four. So I am going to go way back. And it's a bit of not an odd one, but it's not an obvious one. It's the 92-93 season where we won the second division. And it's not for necessarily just footballing reasons. The sort of 2 years prior to that, I was playing football for a boys' club in Newcastle. And I used to play against the likes of Steve Watson, Rob Elliott, Lee Clark, when they were playing for Wallsend Boys Club. I went to school with Rob Elliott and used to go and knock around with him and actually go and watch him play when he played for the juniors at Benwell. So I got to know a lot of the younger lads. So seeing them come through over the next couple of years was really quite special. So that's the reason that I kind of really enjoyed that particular season, because it was before football went mental with the Premier League going completely bonkers. It still felt like a normal football club, if that makes sense. So that's probably my favourite season.
Yousef, what about yourself?
Yeah, I was going to go for something quite recent. It's not actually one of the seasons when we were particularly good, but I was going to go for 17-18, which was our first season in the Premier League under Benitez. Partly because we were under the same terrible ownership, Ashley. We had actually a lot of the same players as we have now. We had Lascelles, Hayden, Shelby, Richie, Gale. They were all here. But the feeling around the place was just we were a club moving in the right direction. I've partly picked that because even though we all sort of look back to better days when we were very good, and we look forward to hopefully better days in the future, things can even be better. Things can be so much better than they are at the moment, even with small changes to the management. And I just want to try to make the point that, you know, we can still try to enjoy good times under Ashley. And this season was one of them. There were some great moments. 3 of our last 6 home games, we beat Man United, Arsenal and Chelsea. I managed to get to a few aways that season. I was there when Sivet scored a free kick at West Ham. The absolute confusion in the away end, and nobody really knew what was going on. There were just some great moments in that season, and it felt that we were a club that had sort of a nice group of players, a manager who was trying to achieve and move in the right direction. And we did struggle for large parts of the season, but it didn't feel as sort of desperate and miserable as this season does. So I don't think I have to look back that far to find a season that I much preferred following Newcastle, and that was one.
I think, James, you are going to dip a little bit further back into the archives, aren't you?
I am, and actually this one's quite close to Tim's choice. The one I'm going for was the 94-95 season, and this was the first season I attended as a fan, the first season I got a season ticket with my dad, and ever since that year I've had one as well. But yeah, what a great introduction to the club that year was for me. You know, at age 6 years old, I think I was. I mean, the first game that sticks out for me was the Chelsea home game. Andy Cole scored a brace that day. I remember it like it was yesterday. The first goal was a rocket from way outside the box, top left corner. It was an unbelievable goal, and we went on to win that game 4-2. I think Rob Lee scored and Will Fox got the other one. But very shortly after that game, 2 or 3 days later, we went away. Well, not myself, but listening on the radio, I remember we went to Royal Antwerp and won 5-0 in the UEFA Cup game, and Rob Lee scored a hat-trick of headers that night, and it was great memories. And we didn't have the best defence that season, but it didn't matter because we'd easily score 3 or 4 goals most games, so we'd inevitably end up winning most games. But I think we stayed unbeaten for the first 10 games that season, and we only drew 2 of those 10 and had a huge lead going into November. But of course, we sold Andy Cole in January, which was a huge mistake, and it really affected us, and we ended up finishing 6th. And look, I'm certain we would have won the league that season if Cole had stayed. But look, we're built on that foundation the following season when we signed Ginola and Ferdinand, and that's when things really started to get interesting for us. But yeah, that season 94-95 with Cole, Beardsley, Lee, Gillespie, Clark, Albert, Pav, it was a fantastic team and just a joy to watch.
Yeah, some great players you mentioned there, great memories. For me, not being from Newcastle, I didn't obviously go to a game until a little bit later than you, and so it kind of changed what my perception, I guess, of what I thought was a good season. I remember all those things you talk about. I remember all the 5-0 Antwerp game. I remember that, and I remember the beating Man United 5-0, all those things. But for me, I've kind of cheated a little bit. I'm sorry, but the 01-02 season and then into 02-03, I think were probably my favourites. It's getting to the point where I was, starting to watch football in pubs and going out drinking with your pals and having a good football team to watch. Is obviously a bonus to go with that. But I mean, in that time, we beat Leeds 4-3, kind of great little comeback there. Nobby Solano scoring the winner, beat Man U 4-3. The Arsenal away game where we won 3-1 there. Just fantastic performances. We played fantastic football as well. It was really enjoyable to watch us. We were pacey, we were dynamic. Bobby Robson, as I'm sure for a lot of us, is kind of one of our heroes. Absolutely one of my, I love the bloke. And I think having that guy who was so passionate about Newcastle in charge of what was a great team, and he deserves his statue as far as I'm concerned, but not just for the football side of things. So I think he brought that. I think what we want Newcastle to be now is sort of what he brought to Newcastle United Football Club at that time. I think we were kind of all together. We played the way we wanted to play. All right, we didn't win anything, but we had a bloody good time along the way. And you think about the European adventures that went with that, the Feyenoord game, going from losing the first 3 of the group stage of the Champions League to winning the next 3 in qualifying, beating Juventus, beating Leverkusen in Germany, just fantastic memories. And you kind of spoiled as a Newcastle fan, growing up in that era a little bit, really. You think, oh, well, why is it not always like this? You live and learn, I suppose. But yeah, just those were my kind of highlights, I suppose.
I'm staggered no one's mentioned 2021 season.
I've drunk it out of my mind. I don't know about anyone else. I can only remember hungover snippets, and I've watched the match of the day. I think is probably the safest way to do it. Lads, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat today. We've done about 45 minutes, so I think we'll call that quits there. Yeah, great to see you all. I hope everyone has enjoyed at home. We will be back as the Writers Block group soon. I don't know when I will see you back on this, lads, but it's great talking to you, and hopefully see everyone again soon. Have a good day. Good night.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See you guys.